When the elevator doors opened to the 13th floor, the man in the charcoal suit did not hurry. He adjusted his cuff, breathed once, and walked down the thick carpet as if he had all the time in the world. The corridor smelled of lemon polish and a faint trace of lilies from the arrangement near the lift. He reached a door that did not belong to him, even though the hotel itself did. He stood there for a moment. He listened. Inside, he heard the soft rustle of fabric, a laugh that sounded forced, and a man pretending his life was not about to break. He knocked. Silence moved through the room like cold water. The door opened 3 inches, then wider. The man in the charcoal suit looked from one face to the other, and his eyes did not change. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He only placed a key card on the small table by the door, next to a crumpled scarf and a hat with a velvet band. And he said the 2 quietest words in the world. Enough now. Then he turned and left the way he had come, leaving behind the air of lilies and a mirror that refused to look away. Before that day, life in the little apartment over the bakery was simple. The walls held the smell of coffee in the mornings and warm sugar in the evenings. Mira wiped the window glass with the edge of her shirt and watched people hurry past with paper bags. The street felt like an old friend who knew every secret but kept them all. She folded towels that still carried the sun from the roofline and lined them in a neat stack. She kept a bowl for keys by the door and a vase for flowers when there were flowers. She made space for hope on the smallest shelf. Her husband, Arun, came home with chalk on his sleeves and ink on his fingers. He was clever with numbers and patient with children. He taught math at a community school where the paint peeled and the yard held more dust than grass. He could make a colorless day feel bright by talking about symmetry and the way a circle never ends. He was not rich. He called himself poor with a half smile, like a man who wants to be seen as simple because the opposite feels dangerous. He liked to believe he had chosen a hard life on purpose. Sometimes life had chosen for him. Mira was the daughter of a man who built cities inside his head and then laid them brick by brick on actual land. People called him a tycoon, a titan, a number with too many zeros. She called him father. To her, he was the man who carried her to bed when she fell asleep in the car and tucked her in without turning on the big light. He was the man who peeled oranges the way her mother had taught him, careful to keep the skin in one long piece that looked like a ribbon. He was the man who never asked why she wanted a small wedding, a small apartment, and a life outside the shadow of his buildings. He gave her his blessing and a set of kitchen knives that were better than she needed. Everyone said she married down. She thought she married toward the ground, where real life grows. She wanted a home where the floor creaked at night and the neighbors knew her name. She wanted to be looked at as a person, not as a door to a vault. She told her father, "I am happy." He looked at her, weighed the words like coins, and nodded once. He sent her no money and all the love he had learned to hide. Arun knew her father's number, the way a swimmer knows the deep end. He joked about it early on. He kept joking. He loved Mira's laugh when she rolled her eyes, the tiny crease at the corner of her mouth. He loved the way she believed in ordinary days. He loved her soft hands and the way her hair smelled like rain when she came back from the roof. He also loved the idea that he had not been chosen for his bank balance. He repeated it often, until it became a prayer, he said to himself, when the sink clogged and the landlord delayed again. The shop on the corner changed hands in spring. The new sign had a clean serif and a gold thread stitched through the paint. A bell chimed when you opened the door, the kind that remembered old trains and quieter streets. Inside, hats hung like moons. Felt, straw, velvet, silk. Ribbons whispered when you walked past. The milliner introduced herself as Anaya. She wore a measuring tape around her neck and a ring so simple it looked like a promise. She was married, she mentioned with a smile that cut its own shape. She loved her craft. She spoke about crown height and brim curves with the devotion of a gardener. Speaking about soil, Mira wanted to buy a hat she did not need. She bought a small one with a navy band, the kind you wear when you feel brave about nothing in particular. Anaya wrapped it in tissue and spoke about a charity show she planned for the fall. She needed volunteers to help with numbers and seating, and the way costs add up in corners people forget to count. Someone mentioned Arun's skill at spreadsheets and order. Anaya asked in her calm voice if he could spare a weekend, maybe 2. It would be for a good cause. Arun looked at the neat, bright shop and the precise way Anaya aligned the edges of the paper. He said yes. The days moved. Myra baked banana bread in a tin that had belonged to her grandmother and sent slices to the school. She wrote lists on the back of receipts and crossed items off with satisfaction that felt clean. Arun spent evenings at the milliner's shop, billed sheets and budgets. The soft thunk of the stamp on invoices, the smell of steam from the hat blocks rising like a small, polite ghost. He came home late and kissed Mira's hair with gratitude that felt practiced. At first, the change was minor. He wore a new aftershave that smelled like cedar and the inside of a new book. He chewed mint leaves, he said, because the children complained about his coffee breath. He laughed and touched her shoulder. The light in his eyes looked a shade brighter. A man who has been seen can glow from the inside out. Mira noticed the glow. She felt glad, and then she felt careful. She set another place for dinner. On nights he said he might bring someone from the shop to review receipts. No one came. She saved the food for tomorrow and told herself that tomorrow always arrives. There were text messages, whose tone could have been about hats and costs and stages with tricky stares. Could have been. There were voice notes that ended with a small breath that was not quite a sigh. Could have been nothing. Could have been air. Mira decided not to become a detective. She decided to become a listener. She listened to her own body. She heard the tightness in her neck and the quiet weight behind her ribs. She pressed a warm cloth to both and waited for them to ease. Her father stopped by sometimes. He never came upstairs, not unless she begged. He stood on the pavement and tasted the sweetness from the bakery with the air. He asked about the school, about the children who solved problems with crayons when numbers ran away. He asked about the leaky sink and the landlord. He did not ask about the new shop with the gold thread sign or the way Arun's shoes stayed by the door while the hours kept walking. There are betrayals that crash like plates on tile. There are betrayals that move like ivy and wait. This one liked to wait. The charity show was a success. People clapped. Hats tipped and flashed. Checks were signed. Photos were taken in front of a floral wall where every petal had been pinned by someone's careful hand. Arun stood beside Anaya in one photo that made its way to social media. They looked the way a new idea looks before it learns its cost. After the show, the late nights did not stop. They changed their reason. Inventory, orders, new clients. A buyer from a larger house wanted a meeting. The meeting was in a hotel because quiet matters when people hold pens that change other people's rent. Arun dressed like a man who wanted to appear older by 5 years and safer by 10. He kissed Mira on the top of her head and told her to sleep. She ironed a shirt for him until the fabric held a line sharp, enough to cut something you cannot name. Her father was not the kind of man who followed people. He believed in trust the way a builder believes in foundations. He also believed in gravity. Things fall the way they must. A concierge who had worked in his hotels for 21 years called him that afternoon with a careful voice. "Sir, it may be nothing." He used the word may as if it could still save someone from themselves. Her father listened without asking for names. He thanked the man and put on the charcoal suit that fit him like a thought he had considered for weeks. When he reached the 13th floor, he did not plan a scene. He planned mercy in the shape of interruption. He knocked. The door opened. Time changed shape. Arun's mouth opened, then closed. Anaya held one hand near her throat as if she was checking whether her pulse had chosen to keep going. The room had 2 glasses on a tray and a hat on a chair, navy with a velvet band. The bed was unmade in an ordinary way that felt louder than it should. Her father set the key card on the table, the one that proved he could enter any room in any building he owned. He did not use it. He put it down and left. Because sometimes the most powerful thing is the silence that makes other people listen to themselves. He drove to the little street where the bakery breathed sugar and the apartment window held a smudge that Mira always meant to clean. He stood on the pavement and looked up. He waited until he could breathe the way he wanted to speak. He called her name once. She leaned out with a towel in her hand and a soft line between her brows. She saw him. She saw the suit. She saw what the suit meant on a weekday afternoon. She set the towel down on the sill and came down the stairs with both hands, holding the rail as if the wood could steady. What the world had decided to move. They did not talk in dramatic lines. He walked beside her to the park bench that faced the schoolyard where the swings squeaked. He told a story that did not begin with her husband. It began with himself. Once, when he was young and married and foolish, he had chosen flattery over loyalty. It had lasted 13 days and ended with a hotel breakfast he could not eat. He had never told anyone. He told her now because truth was a better gift than money. He told her what it had taken to rebuild the ground under his feet and the ground under her mother's feet. He told her how regret sounds at night when the house is quiet and the lights are off. He told her that when he knocked on the door upstairs, he did it as the man he wished had knocked on his own door long ago. He did not tell her to leave or to forgive. He told her that she could stand. He told her he would stand near. Mira did not cry on that bench. She watched the children push each other higher until the chains rattled and the sky seemed closer than it had any right to be. She felt the shape of her life in her hands and realized it could break and still be a life. She went upstairs and folded the towels again. She put the navy hat with the velvet band back in its box. She placed it in the back of the closet, behind winter coats. She made tea because some rituals do not abandon you when you are alone. Then she wrote a note on a single sheet of paper. It was not angry. It named the hour, the hotel, and the way the air had changed in their home months ago. It also named the boundary she would not cross, the one where a person betrays themselves to keep someone else comfortable. Arun came home to quiet that felt like a mirror. He found the note. His hands trembled. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at his shoes, as if the laces might tie themselves into a better story. He walked to the window that looked over the bakery's roof, and he searched for any sign that this was still his life. He could not find one. He slept on the couch because the bed looked like something he had not earned in the morning. Mira packed a small bag and left her wedding ring in the bowl by the keys. She closed the door gently because she still respected doors. She went to the old cottage by the sea that her father kept in a place where the wind did not ask questions. She sat on the steps and watched the water push itself toward the shore again and again like someone who refuses to give up. She ate bread and tomatoes. She slept with the window open so the night air could move through her chest. She waited to see what the ache would teach her. Arun called without leaving messages. He sent texts that spoke in the past tense about how they had met at the library and laughed over a broken umbrella. He wrote about the first apartment and the cupboard that would not close. He did not write about the hotel room. He took a leave from the school and sat with his guilt, like a person who has been told to hold a heavy box and not put it down. Anaya stopped by with a paper bag that held a scarf Myra had left at the shop months ago. She placed it on the table. She looked at the floor, then at the window. Her own marriage had cracked when the quiet became loud. She had moved to an aunt's house where the mirror did not accuse her every morning. She did not ask for comfort. She did not offer any weeks gathered. The sea taught Mira how a wound can breathe and still not drown. She walked the beach early, when the gulls shouted the same arguments they shouted every day. She found small shells and put them in a jar on the windowsill because beauty that costs nothing still counts. She started to sketch on the backs of envelopes. Shapes of hats appeared without her asking. She thought of the milliner's shop and the care that lived there. She thought about hands and trade and women who needed work that would not demand their souls. Back in the city, her father went to the school with a donation he did not sign. New paint arrived. The playground got a patch of grass. The swings stopped squeaking. He visited Arun at the apartment where the couch had made a permanent dent. He did not carry anger in with him. He carried a single folder that held a reference letter for a job at a foundation that funded community arts. He said only that work can be a rope when you are falling. He left the folder on the table and went home to eat the kind of dinner a widower eats when he has learned to be gentle with himself. Arun took the job. He traveled to small towns and listened to tailors and weavers talk about thread count and price and how a hand learns rhythm. He slept alone. He stopped wearing the cedar aftershave because it held too many rooms inside it. He grew thinner, then steadier. He wrote letters to Mira that he did not send. He kept them in a box that once held a pair of shoes he never wore because they felt borrowed. The cottage taught Myra patience. She learned to fix a leaky faucet from a video where a pair of hands did not judge her. She cooked for herself and ate at the small table where the salt left a mark on the wood. She thought of the way her father had told the story of his own failure, almost as if he had been waiting for the chance to share the weight. She thought of her mother, gone for years, and the way some people continue to tuck you in even after the bed is empty. She walked into town and passed a shop that had been empty since a storm broke its front window 2 winters ago. She stood in front of it until the sun moved from one side of the street to the other. Then she called the number on the faded sign. The lease was fair. The repairs were not complicated. She scrubbed the floor on her knees until the gray tiles remembered their original color. She painted the walls white and invited the light to do some work. She placed a long table in the center of the room and a kettle on a small stove in the back. She pinned a piece of brown paper to the wall and wrote 3 lines with a pencil. We make what hands can make. We pay fair. We keep secrets that are not ours to tell. A widow who could braid reeds so tight the sun could not find a gap. A single mother who could stitch the same line for hours without letting it waver. A girl with quiet shoulders and an eye for balance who had learned to do without praise. They brought skills and stories. They drank tea. They worked. The first hats were simple and honest, straw with clean bands, felt with an edge that curved like a familiar road. Each piece felt like a small truth told without fear. People tried them on and saw something gentle in the mirror. Orders came, slow and then steady. When the first prophet sat in Mira's hand, she did not think of it as a trophy. She thought of it as proof that pain can become shape. She sent a portion to the school in the city with a note that said, "For the library windows." She wrote another check to the foundation where Arun worked, and she signed it with the name of the shop. She did not add a message. She knew he would recognize the handwriting. She thought of how mercy sometimes travels through ordinary channels, because drama only repeats the wound. Arun opened the envelope at his desk and held check between his fingers like a fragile thing. He read the name and closed his eyes. The room around him continued to hum. A volunteer asked him about grant deadlines. He answered. He set the check down and did not cry because some tears belonged to the old life, and he was trying to live in the new one with grace. Months turned to a year. Then another. The hats from the seaside shop appeared in photos that did not mention Mira by name, but held her touch in every line. Women wrote to say they felt visible without shouting. A magazine came to the cottage to talk about the movement toward small things made well. Myra brewed tea and spoke about edges and weight. She did not speak about the 13th floor of a hotel and a navy hat on a chair. She spoke about women who needed their hands to mean something again. Her father visited the shop one afternoon, not in the charcoal suit, but in a sweater with a loose thread he never noticed. He stood at the door and watched a young girl measure ribbon as if it were a river. He looked at his daughter and saw a calm in her face that he had not seen even when she was happy in the city. He understood something then. He had tried to build safety by making everything big. She had built safety by making something small and true. He felt the urge to reach for his wallet, and then he did not. He reached for her hand instead. He squeezed it once and let go like a man who knows when to stay and when to leave. One autumn evening, a man stood outside the glass and looked in. He held a hat box with careful hands. He wore a jacket that had been mended at the elbow, and the mend suited him. He waited until the last customer left. He stepped inside and greeted no one. He placed the hat box on the table and opened it. Inside lay the navy hat with the velvet band. Its shape had not changed. The ribbon held a faint scent of something that used to reach the back of Myra's throat and stay there. Arun did not sit. He did not explain the hotel, the weeks, the why. That never helps anyway. He took a small envelope from his jacket and placed it beside the hat. It contained a letter with 3 lines. He wrote that he had learned how emptiness is not the same as space. He wrote that he wished her wholeness without asking to stand near it. He wrote that he had found a quiet way to help others build small, true things, and that every time he did, he thought of the day she wrote a note and chose a door. Mira read the lines and felt no heat in her face, only a coolness that did not hurt. She looked at the hat the way you look at a photograph after you have forgiven someone inside it. She closed the box and returned it to him. She told him with her eyes, because sometimes the mouth confuses what the eyes can keep clean, that he should keep it. He nodded. He turned to the door. He stood a moment longer, like a man counting to 3. Then he left, and the bell made the small sound bells make when they understand. When winter came, the sea turned silver and hard. The women wore fingerless gloves to keep the blood moving. The shop sold wool cloches that sat low and kept secrets warm. There was a storm that bent the sign on its bracket. Mira climbed a ladder and held the wrench in both hands and tightened the bolts while the wind made her eyes water. She climbed down and felt the earth accept her weight again. She looked up at the sign with the name she had chosen and liked the way it moved a little even now, as if it refused to become rigid. On the second anniversary of the day on the bench by the schoolyard, Mira visited the city. She walked past the bakery with its new owner and stood on the opposite pavement from the window, where a smudge had remained through all seasons. Arun came out of the school gate with a box of donated books. He laughed at something a child said that she could not hear from across the street. He looked lighter. He looked older, in the way a tree looks older, not weaker. He placed the box in a car with the foundation logo and paused. He lifted his face as if rain had started. It had not. He squinted at the far side of the street and did not see her. Not seeing her was a kind of grace too. She turned and walked away before the moment asked for more than it could hold. That night she ate soup and listened to the sea shrugged against the shore. She thought of the 13th floor. She thought of her father's knock. She thought of how easily a life can drift if no one interrupts it. She sent a message to him, the man in the charcoal suit, who had learned how to use silence the way some men use weapons. She wrote, "Thank you for knocking." He replied with a heart and a photograph he had taken long ago of her mother holding an orange peel shaped like a ribbon. When spring softened the edges of the air, a woman came into the shop with a story folded inside her wallet. She had left a marriage that had eaten her voice one small bite at a time. She needed work. She needed to feel the day change because of what her hands did. Myra offered her tea. She took off her coat. She sat at the table and learned how to shape felt with steam and patience. In the afternoons, she stood at the doorway and watched the water do the same thing again and again without apology. She began to hum while she sewed. The tune had no words and did not need any. One evening, Myra closed the shop alone. She stood in the center of the room and looked at the long table with its small dents and burn marks. She placed her palm flat on the wood. It felt warm. She thought of vows. She thought of the ones we make to other people and the ones we forget to make to ourselves. She spoke one out loud, but softly, the way people speak in a church when no service is happening. "I will not leave myself." The room did not answer. It held the promise the way good walls hold heat. Years later, a man walked through a garden he had made in a yard behind a small house with a red door. He had learned the names of plants the way he once learned the names of donors. He watered in the early morning and again when the sun began to go down. He married a woman who forgave slowly and only after she had seen him choose kindness when no one was watching. They had a son who built towers from blocks and knocked them down with delight. And once he asked whether the wind had a name, the man listened to the leaves move and told him the wind was saying a long story none of them would finish hearing. In the cottage by the sea, Mira kept the jar of shells on the sill. The glass had gotten cloudy over time, the way some truths blur when you have stared at them long enough to feel safe. She hired more women. She taught a girl to cut ribbon without leaving frayed edges. She trusted the girl with the key to the till and felt no fear. She visited her father and fed him soup on days when the world moved faster than his knees could approve. He looked at her and at the shop's small ledger and told her that she had built the only company that never needed to go public. She laughed and held his hand until sleep took him in the chair. Sometimes, tourists came in and asked for the story of the shop. They wanted romance in the explanation, a lost love, a found fortune, a name to whisper over drinks with strangers. Mira poured tea and spoke about women and work and the dignity of small wages that arrive on time. She let the hats tell the rest. On the day the wind lifted the awning and set it down again, as if testing its loyalty, Myra stood at the doorway and watched the sky. It was an ordinary blue with nothing dramatic to confess. She thought about the 13th floor once more, not as a wound, but as a door that had closed with tenderness. She thought of her father's knock, and the way his eyes had remained kind even when the truth was unkind. She thought of the navy hat with the velvet band, and how some objects keep the past in them like a fossil in stone. She locked up for the night. She walked to the water and stood where the tide makes its soft argument. Her hair blew across her face, and she tucked it behind her ear, the way she had when she was 20, and felt indestructible. She stayed until the light went gold, then amber, then the blue that makes the first star brave. She turned to go home, and the sea kept speaking in its patient voice, repeating the one lesson that had built her new life. What returns is not always what left, and that is a kind of mercy too. He never stood on that 13th floor carpet again. He never saw the hotel lilies with the bruised petals. He never saw her father's knock coming. But every time he watered his garden and the wind moved through the leaves, it said her name the way someone says a prayer for a person who is no longer lost. And every time she pinned a ribbon to a crown and pressed the curve with steam, The shape that rose carried no secrets, only the quiet truth that something once broken had learned how to hold.